Dewey wrote The Lost Individual in 1930, a time of economic uncertainty following the American stock market crash of 1929. According to Dewey, the development of a corporate nation at that time had been accompanied by a submergence of the individual. Because the stability of individuality depends upon stable objects to which allegiance firmly attaches itself. The most marked trait of present life is insecurity. Where fears abound, courageous and robust individuality is undermined. If our external combinations in industrial activity were reflected in organic integrations of the desires, purposes and satisfactions of individuals, the verbal protestations would disappear, because social unity would be a matter of course. Dewey frames the law of mental integrity, in which the unified mind comes into being only when conscious intent and consummation are in harmony with the consequences actually affected. To be self-possessed, human nature must have objects in which it can attach itself. If the simple duties of peace do not establish a common life, the emotions are mobilized in a service of a war that will supply its temporary stimulation. Dewey explains the pragmatic feature of flux as it pertains to individuality. He says that we have loosened the ties that gave order and support to our lives. Our beliefs are not relevant to the society in which we outwardly act. I believe that this is true in our time, the information age, as it was in Dewey's time, the industrial age. Dewey tells us that individuals will only find themselves as their ideas and ideals are brought into harmony with the realities of the age in which they act. He tells us that we must first acknowledge in thought that this brings us intelligent discrimination and choice. Dewey stresses the ameliorative feature of pragmatism. This is the first step in forming those objects of significant allegiance out of which stable and efficacious individuality may grow. In The Live Creature and Aesthetic Experience, Dewey begins by explaining how difficult it is to restore continuity between an everyday experience of doings and refined and intensified forms of experience that are works of art. The two cannot be separated because emotion is their moving and cementing force. Emotion selects what is congruous and dyes what it selects with its color, thereby giving qualitative unity to materials externally disparate and dissimilar. It thus provides unity in and through the varied parts of an experience. When unity occurs, the experience has aesthetic character, even though it is not dominantly an aesthetic experience. Dewey believes that art is set upon a pedestal. Many people would not recognize that the activities and hobbies that they enjoy in their leisure are aesthetic. When we have an experience, Dewey contends that experience occurs continuously. Locke's and Hume's separate and independent ideas and expressions would contradict what Dewey thinks. He says our ideas are like a train of ideas. They are phases, emotionally and practically distinguished. They are subtle shadings of a pervading and developing hue. Dewey writes that intellectual experience must bear an aesthetic stamp. Some decisive action is needed to so relate impressions to facts that their value can be tested and organized. The artist is controlled in the process of his work by his grasp of the connection between what he has already done and what he will do next. He has to see each particular connection of doing and undergoing in relation to the whole that he wants to produce. So marked is the doing face of art. We cannot measure or define perfection in terms of execution. Art historians and critics consider Paul Cézanne a great artist, but he's not the best technical painter. Art unites the very same relation of doing and undergoing, outgoing and incoming energy that makes an experience to be an experience. Unless the doing and the emotional expression are related to each other to form a whole in perception, the thing is done and not fully aesthetic. The real work of an artist is to build up an experience that is coherent in perception while moving with constant change in its development. In perceiving an artwork, the beholder must create his or her own experience, and that creation must include relations comparable to those which the original producer underwent. At every stage in his work, the artist must at each point retain and sum up what has gone before as a whole and with reference to a whole to come. An object is peculiarly and dominantly aesthetic, Dewey points out, yielding the enjoyment characteristic of aesthetic perception when the factors that determine anything which can be called an experience are lifted high above the threshold of perception and are made manifest for their own sake.